Hey guys, this is Analyze Nation. I know it has been a while since I've recorded, but frankly, I don't want to do too much right now because my camera is crap and I'm saving up to get a new one, and I don't really want to put a video up right now unless I feel it is important to do so. Now, this series, in case you're not looking at the title, why are you here? This series is going to be a long form analysis of me analyzing the Star Wars movies because I am a Star Wars geek, and I want to basically do something special on my channel before The Last Jedi comes out in December the 15th, I believe. Um, so we're going to be starting with Episode 1, A Phantom Menace. Now, the way I'm going to be doing these discussions, since this is the first one, I say discussions, but I'm basically going to be talking about the film until I have nothing to talk about, and that's really it. This format, I know, is not one that's used often. In fact, there's only one other person I know who does it, and I am borrowing this idea from him. His name is The Lore Runner. He has his own YouTube channel, and he does great stuff. And that brings me to my second point. He has done a similar analysis of this film that I have watched. I will try not to repeat too many things he says unless I feel they are important in discussing my thoughts. Didn't just wanted to say that so that anyone who's seen both by coincidence won't just say, "Hey, you're copying him." Like, yes, I acknowledge that this idea is very much from him, but I hope I'm going to be adding to the discussion of the themes and various other things in this work. So, on to Phantom Menace. I will be doing each film, starting, chronologically in the universe, not chronologically as they were released, because that's how my brain works. So, starting a little bit from me, I was very young when I became aware of the Phantom Menace's existence. I'm going to be talking about this more when I go through 4, 5, and 6, but my Star Wars journey started with watching the VHSs of the original trilogy. With my father introduced me to them, and we watched all of them. I believe this was at my uncle's house. It was kind of like a treat. I believe we were there for Christmas or something, and we had a bunch of free time to kill. So he was like, "Son, I'm going to introduce you to Star Wars." And I don't know, considering how much I'm obsessed with it, he probably regrets that decision somewhat. But anyways, so I had seen 4, 5, and 6, and then I wasn't really aware of the prequels. I was born in 1998 for reference, so I wouldn't have seen them when they came out. Uh, and I was pretty young, and I remember being in being in a store with my dad, and we were going through, I think it was a Best Buy store. He was buying something, I don't remember what, and on the DVD aisle, I just happened to see, uh, in, big letters, 1, 2, and 3 in Roman numerals. So I'm like, I'm a kind of smart kid at the time, not super smart, but I go over and I recognize that they're the same Roman numeral style, and they have Star Wars on them. It's like Star Wars 1, 2, and 3. I didn't even know, and I'm a kid. I'm like, more Star Wars, yes. Uh, but my dad never really told me about the prequels, and I asked him, "Was like, how, did you know about these?" And he's like, "Yeah." And it's like, I don't think they're that good, but yeah, sure. So, credit where credit is due, I believe. Unless I have a terrible memory, which I'm sure I don't. He bought those, at least the first two. I actually don't think 3 was out yet. Um, well, no, I was older than that. Yeah, three was out yet. So it might have been all 3. I don't know. Um, but we go home and I watch it, and I remember really enjoying it. And there's the joke that the prequels really are for little kids, and I suppose that's true because I really did enjoy it as a fairly young kid. Um, and yeah, I'm not going to apologize for that. Star Wars is near and dear to my heart. And some of my favorite things about Star Wars are from the prequels, which you'll be hearing more of when we go through the various discussion notes that I have on the phone. So, speaking of which, I should probably pull that up. Yeah. So that's a little bit about me and how I got introduced to Phantom Menace. I'm going to be doing this for each of the films, my introduction to them. I suppose I really wouldn't need to for two, since it's pretty much the same way. Anyways, so next I'm going to be talking about behind the scenes stuff. Now, where to start? There's so many places I could start. What I do know going into this is when it was announced that there would be a new trilogy, that Star Wars was going to be touched again as a film, since the first time since like 1980, there was a huge excitement. I know this from people who talk about this other than me, and just from looking back at news articles about it, and a documentary which I've actually seen that's basically being filmed as the Phantom Menace was really gaining traction as a concept. Now, this really shows in a lot of ways. The team that George Lucas had for this film, was almost entirely made out of yes men. And this really shows because George Lucas, while I will give him credit as a great idea man, uh, well, because he created the Star Wars universe, I mean, you got to give him credit for that. And as a visual director, he is not really good at complex ideas and with character. My opinion, but I believe I will be able to show that throughout the course of this analysis. So that's the first part. Second of all, it really shows in the actors' performances. And in the behind the scenes stuff. If you watch them, they are all trying to hide that they're terrified, frankly, of touching a franchise that is so beloved and was so successful. I mean, Liam Neeson's pretty awesome, and Ewan McGregor is pretty awesome. Samuel L. Jackson, again, pretty awesome. But not only do they have to deal with the pressure of being the first Star Wars movie in about 2 decades, they also have to deal with not the best dialogue. And I know that's been touched on before. It's not really anything new for me to say that George Lucas's dialogue is not always the crispest. Can't talk. But it is indeed a factor that I would be remiss if I did not mention it. So those two things really out the gate would end up hampering this film, in my opinion, because if you can't make an actor relaxed and you can't really give them the best material to work with, you're already giving yourself a shot in the leg before you even have crossed the finish line. So whatever. Should I talk about this now? People have talked about the CGI endlessly. Personally, I think it's about 50-50 for me about whether it holds up. A lot of the landscapes are just fine for me. The Jar Jar CGI tends to vary. In a couple of scenes, it is very bad. Like, wow. And I'm not blasting the actor for this. I think he gets way too much shit, frankly, when it comes to how unpopular Jar Jar is as a character. If you look at the behind the scenes stuff, this guy is very dedicated to carrying out what George wanted, and you're not going to say no to George Lucas, right? Yeah, that would be bad. But that's yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna go into my notes because really, what else is there to do at this point? Get on with it. So the first thing a lot of people complain about, and it's kind of become a joke at this point, is the taxation of trade routes. People complain about too much politics in the Star Wars prequels, and frankly, I disagree. in the sense that it's clearly obvious that politics isn't an unpopular thing to occur in movies or in anything, actually. Game of Thrones is an excellent example of a show where a lot of the reason people watch it, aside from the violence and sex, is the politics. House of Cards is another one. Rest in peace, Kevin Spacey's career. And, well, actually, any show, when you think about it. Because politics, when you get down to it, is just interaction. There's office politics. There's people talking to each other politics. Um, and I'm a big defender of not watering down definitions until they get meaningless. But really, politics isn't a bad thing. What I've heard this referred to, and what I tend to ascribe to, is that this is bureaucracy, and bureaucracy isn't interesting. It's how things get done. It's the nitty gritty, process, endless forms and sheets and, you got to sign this here and then you got to, go to hardware and get this thing approved and, yada, yada, yada. It goes along and you're just, bored to tears at the end of it. That's what, taxation of trade routes and all of that stuff is, because there's no really dramatic intrigue written into it. It's just, well, here's this process that we got to go through. Which I'll agree is dull. If this were better written, I might care about the taxation of trade routes, which is another thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not like the biggest EU expert, especially before the Phantom Menace era. But what exactly is happening with the trade routes? Is there more taxation than there should be? Is there less? Is there not enough? I mean, like, I get that you don't want to like bore your audience with explanations. We'll get to that when we get to the Force Awakens on why that's kind of a problem in a mindset. But anyways, okay. Anyways, so we finish the crawl. Things are the Jedi have to save the day because the Chancellor sent them, but they have to save the day. And they arrive, and it's here that we get our real first introduction to Nemoidian culture. And this is something that the lore runner has said, but I will also echo it. The Nemoidian culture is very interesting. It's basically the most politician-y culture I've ever seen, to my knowledge. And what I mean by politician-y is you got politicians, the ideal of the politician, the one who wants to better society. And then you have politician-y. And those are the people that don't want to take responsibility for anything. They always shift the blame, and they're basically there for the career, in my opinion. And I don't want to get too into that and argue about that. But that's basically what the Nemoidians are, if you think about it. Because there's no one on that ship that's Nemoidian, Statistically speaking, it's all droids. The droids are the soldiers, and we see the one protocol droid be like the maid person, kind of. And there's only like the core leadership structure that you absolutely, know really you need this, that's there. And I say this is politician-y because they shift the responsibility onto someone else. I don't want to be a soldier. I don't want to be a maid. I don't want to take responsibility. I don't want to have to go into battle. I don't want to have to, serve the dignitary's tea. I doubt a lot of them even want to be running the thing, and that's why I think Newt Gunray is a bit of an anomaly in that aspect. But that's another topic. It's just interesting to me that that the idea that these people as a culture have come accustomed to basically being a pro at not taking responsibility for things. And I really like that. I really enjoy that concept. The fact that there are no Nemoidian soldiers, that they're all droids. We actually do see some Nemoidian soldiers in episode 3, and you get there when I get there, I suppose. Or maybe I won't. They're barely there. But yeah, just thought I'd talk about that. Um, the Jedi. I'm going to be talking about this more when we get to Anakin, but, and this might be unpopular, but I don't think that this story should have had two Jedi. At least, at least at the beginning. Because what this story suffers from is that you don't really know who your protagonist is. Because we learn about Qui-Gon Jinn and we learn about Obi-Wan, and while a type of deuteroprotagonist thing can work very well, in fact, I don't think it was the right call here. And I'm going to get into this more when we get to Qui-Gon meeting Anakin, but I really think this story should have just been Obi-Wan that we follow until we get to Tatooine. And I'm going to explain briefly here because it's not too hard to have happen. Let's say Obi-Wan, who is known as an exceptionally good, diplomatic Padawan, especially considering that he's a Padawan, is sent for his first solo mission, because Padawans do get first solo missions if you look at Attack of the Clones, that he's sent to deal with this, mundane, easy debacle with the Trade Federation and Naboo. Because remember, there's been no real conflict in this galaxy for like decades. Nothing on a galactic scale that would be of any importance in recent history. So it would make a lot of sense, really, for it to just be Obi-Wan, because this could be his like final thing before, his test to become a knight, since it's made pretty clear that he's pretty close there anyway in the original Phantom Menace. And then it would be a nice kind of commentary on how like Obi-Wan doesn't expect this to be hard. He could even have the Qui-Gon line, or at least the implication that he's thinking, this is going to be short. Like, I'm calm, I'm relaxed, this is going to be no trouble, right? And I get that this would be difficult because you would have to create things for him to interact with. Because, as a book, this would be easy. We just hear his thoughts and, yes, going to the Trade Federation. But we don't have that here. We'd have him and maybe a scene where, I'm not going to rewrite the whole movie with this in mind, and I acknowledge it would be pretty difficult without another Jedi like a Qui-Gon to bounce stuff off of him. But, I'm going to leave that, hypothetical if Obi-Wan was the sole protagonist. I'm going to get really into the meat of that discussion in several key points throughout the plot. So we get this thing. We, fast forward. And it's very clear, and this ties into the whole, like, this should be easy thing, that the Republic is basically, at its most grand that it has ever been. There's no conflict. We send Jedis to, deal with minor stuff like this. We don't have an army. And this is especially true, you can see, even though you could argue that this is just Naboo's culture, but I don't think it is, that Naboo doesn't have an army. Their planet gets conquered in a day. A day. An entire planet. With dinky little droids that can be cut apart, as George Lucas has said himself, cut apart like butter by the Jedis. And I find that absolutely funny and horrifying to think that there could be such a place where such a clearly, not a strong force, droids that are just basically thrown at any situation in hordes, can legitimately conquer a planet full of humans that can do tactics. They can improvise on the fly. These droids can't do that. Not these. They have a control center that, beams orders into their brains, into their cybernetic brains, whatever. But the point remains, this should not have been this easy. It happened, they conquered their planet less than a day. You know, arguably, it takes a bit while for, the underground stuff, which, it's always puzzled me how they could get droids underground. But anyways, a day. And the funny part is that they all want, the Nemoidians are concerned about making this legal, even though they're the ones that, strangely enough, have the most actual power, aside from the Jedi, in this movie, that have the most, military force. They're still worried about making it legal, which is, it's symbolic power at the most, especially when you're willing to do whatever you want, especially when and it's funny hearing Darth Sidious, complain about legalities. I think that's mostly just for the Nemoidians' benefit. I don't think he actually cares. Uh, but yeah, that's just that's always gotten to me. So negotiations fail. They Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan cut down the droids like butter. Try to, it would have been funny if this movie just kind of like ended that particular plot point by like going to the Nemoidians like, no. But they get run off the ship and decide to go down to the planet. Okay. They land on the opposite side of the planet? On the ship that is going to invade the planet? They land on the opposite side. And we know this because they have to go to the planet core, which I'll get into how stupid that is when we get there. But they go through they're on a ship. Whatever. Yeah, plot. This story is not well crafted. It's funny because I could envision this story being really, really good. But there's just so many things like what I just mentioned that just kind of make you think. And I get there are a few moments like that in the original trilogy, but for some reason, and I think this is a symptom of everybody basically saying yes, George, and the fact that for all accounts I've read and from all his reports, he like locked himself in a room and forced himself to come up with this script, which, you know, um, but yeah, so they get down on the planet. And then a racist character shows up. Now, I'm not generally a person who sees racism in everything. I genuinely don't. But there is no denying that the way Jar Jar speaks, the way he acts, is very indicative of several bigoted stereotypes that you can see in films as far back as, frankly, the first blockbuster, in my opinion. That's Birth of a Nation, if no one knows what I mean by the first blockbuster ever. So, and it's a shame because Jar Jar really could have worked. And, we can debate about whether, a character looking like him could work as a serious character. But imagine this. They're lost. They don't really know where they are. They've somehow landed on the opposite side of the planet. Here's a local. And, you could even do kind of like a Han Solo-ish thing, because he's banished from the village. And, let's not have it be for a stupid reason like being clumsy. Maybe he's just, outside of the cultural norms. They don't want him. He gets kicked out. So he's like, yeah, well, you guys are trying to help out. Wow, this is crazy. I'll take you to my village. Let's go. And I gotta give props again to the actor because the motion stuff, he's doing everything that George is telling him. And um, frankly, I think he deserves a bit more credit as the first one to really get motion capture going. Because the one who really gets that credit is Andy Serkis. I'm not saying he's not good in, the Lord of the Rings movies and everything he's done since then. But I think sadly because of the quality of the film and because of how Jar Jar is as a character, that Ahmed Best is generally ignored. Um, and I'll get into the other problem with the Jar Jar CGI thing when we get in there. Anyways, Jar Jar could have been a great character, truly, because they need help. They don't know much about this planet, probably, this side of the planet anyways, so they need help. Okay, I'm there. And then they go to the underwater city, which is gorgeous. I will give praise where I feel praise is due in this film. The underwater city, that whole sequence of them going down into it is absolutely gorgeous. And the music playing into that, just giving the sense of wonder. I watched that scene, just recently watching the movie before recording this, and it did give me a grin, just a small one, just seeing that. And I'll talk about this later when it's much more important, but John Williams really highlights a lot of scenes in this film. And, this is a good scene, and he improves that, but even the ones that aren't really good, he makes them tolerable for me. So, props to the legend of a man that is John Williams. So, just checking my notes here. Forgive me. Um, I'll talk about more about the Queen when we get there. You know what? I'll talk about the Queen now, because there's kind of some scenes before all the stuff I previously mentioned. I'm just kind of going. This film isn't that memorable, even with me just seeing it. That's why I took so many notes. Amidala's arrogance in our first scene is really funny, and this kind of goes back to the whole Republic legality thing, because she's just like, you've gone too far. There's no way the Republic will not let you get away with this. And Amidala's smart. For a 14-year-old, she knows that the Republic doesn't have any army. She knows she's she's basically saying, you can't do this because the rules say you can't. And it's funny, as a place that's already blockaded them, that they don't really care about that. And her arrogance in just saying, we know that you've been commanded to reach a settlement. And it's very clear, to me at least, that as smart as she is, she's really way in over her head, and she's trying to project a knowledge and a certainty that, while she may, arrogantly believe, probably isn't backed up by anything, to be honest. So there's that. And I want here to talk about, what do you think Palpatine's plan is? I'm serious. I mean, we know his ultimate plan, and I suppose this could have worked in several ways, is to become Chancellor, because that's really the first step in his journey to galactic domination. But what is his exact plan here? Because he doesn't expect Jedi, and that can be pretty clear by saying that the Chancellor kind of went over the entire Senate's head on that, and Palpatine at this point is a Senate. The Senate, wow, I didn't even mean that, is a senator. So it's possible he couldn't have known about them. And that probably did throw the first wrench in his plan, but it's Palpatine. He could have, he expects the unexpected for a living, basically. But I'm kind of wondering what his intentions were. It's like, did he really want the treaty to be signed? Was Padme escaping something that helped or hindered his plan? Did he need to, come up with a couple of new things to make that work for him? I don't really have an answer. I'm curious to see you guys comment below. If you're still watching this, if you are, you must be a really big Star Wars geek like I am. So I should be all caught up on notes. Yeah, okay. So talking about cultures, Gungan culture is also fascinating for me. If you take away the stupid accents, it's interesting to me. How do I phrase this? I want to know how they build their stuff, and I know that may seem like a really weird thing, and I admit it's super geeky of me, but just look at all their stuff. I want to know how those bubbles work, how they're clearly isolationist, and maybe for good reason, against the humans. So was the underwater city originally, their exclusive place of inhabitants? Did they originally maybe live in the swampy forests or around water? Were they driven here by necessity, or it just makes me think, is all. And George Lucas himself, in an interview, the same interview I referenced earlier that came out as the idea of Phantom Menace was really becoming, a serious concept, um, that he created a whole backstory and like how everything works, and just to like flesh it out for himself. And I'm really curious. I've tried to look, but I haven't found his whole thing. We know the EU exists, and we know that the AU exists, or that the AU, canon Disney universe exists, and I don't really know if there's any explanations for any of my questions that I'm asking. Um, Again, let me know. Uh, okay, so this is another point that would be fascinating to see with Obi-Wan being the only person in this film, because think about it, he is known by the time of the Clone Wars as the negotiator, um as the and by the Jedi as basically the quintessential Jedi. um and this would be an interesting scene to see, with him talking to Boss Nass and trying to get his way to where the Queen is on the other side of the planet. But to see him develop his diplomatic skills, because he shouldn't be as good as we know he is in the Clone Wars and in Episode 3. He should be this movie. I'm going to talk about this here. This movie should have been Obi-Wan becoming the man that we essentially see that he is, that we are introduced to in 4, and that we really see the younger version of in 2 and 3. This should have been, in my opinion, Obi-Wan's movie, largely. And obviously Anakin would have been in that and would have played a huge part once we got to him. But in the beginning, I would have really loved to see them explore Obi-Wan in depth as a character, because he'd go to this, and being the Padawan that he is, and being that he didn't expect this to be difficult, he's overwhelmed. He's trying to get back on track, and he's desperately trying to, with the best of his ability, stay calm, um, and say, we got to get here, and all those things with, like, you and the Naboo form a symbiote circle, like all of that good stuff. But he just can't do it. And this would be a nice moment that we get, that he's frustrated, and that maybe he doesn't want to do this, but that he has to, does the Jedi mind trick. And this would be great, because we could see that Obi-Wan sees this as lazy, and that he kind of doesn't appreciate that he has to resort to something that he'd probably at the time see as uncivilized, but that he has to do it. He's given no other choice, and it works. Um, and it would be a nice, callback, or I guess call forward technically, to when he does that in in A New Hope, because by then he's grown and he knows, sometimes you just got to do this. It's not just a cut and dry, like, diplomatic can talk your way out of it situation. But that's enough of my Obi-Wan only fan fiction for the moment. So a scene happens. Qui-Gon's there. They get into the planet core, and yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a sec. Sorry, everyone. Uh, just had to take care of something. College life, it's hectic. So, planet core. Now, for those who don't know, okay, here, I'm going to set up the premise. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan go with Jar Jar, who they need a navigator for. So I know it's Qui-Gon's thing of, like, we need to get him out alive, which is a character trait I don't exactly hate, but it's not endearing to me either. So they get Jar Jar out of there because, all life is valuable, which I do believe. It's just he's an annoying character. So we go through the planet core. with Jar Jar as an expert to get them through the planet core. Obi-Wan brings that up. No, no, I'm sorry. Qui-Gon brings that up. I'm saying is it's harder and harder to remember this movie as it goes on. Qui-Gon's like, we need a navigator. So, okay, Jar Jar doesn't seem to know where he's going, but anyways, so they're they go through this whole pointless sequence, and I say pointless, there's one thing this does serve, but they go through the planet core to get to the other side. Now, I'm going to bore you guys with some science. If your core is hollow, if a planet's core is hollow, you would not have a magnetic field. Your planet would be baking with solar radiation, and a society that has flourished as long as it has, that we see in the movie, could literally not exist. No life as we know it could exist for long without perishing utterly against the stars' rays. So that's the primarily dumb part of it. Now, before I get on to this, I did say there was one possible thing that this served. There is the line that Qui-Gon gives while they're being chased by all these carnivorous fish, by these bloodthirsty fish, huge monsters, and they're being chased by one, and then a larger, huger one eats it and grabs it. And he says, kind of taken as a joke, there's always a bigger fish. Now, sorry. I don't know if George Lucas intended this, because, as I said, I don't believe he's really the biggest deep concept guy. But it's interesting analyzing that line, how much that fits with the rule of two idea that Yoda and Mace bring up, and the whole idea being that there's always a bigger fish, and that we meet Darth Maul and we defeat him, but there's always a bigger fish. That being Palpatine, and in my opinion is the true Phantom Menace of the film, as much people have argued that it's Maul. But anyways, we'll get there when we get there, I suppose. So here's the point of the film where there's basically no scale of time. And I say that because there's this whole sequence, this very short sequence of the beautiful Naboo landscape, which was inspired by Italian or Spanish architecture. I'm one or the other. It looks gorgeous. That I will say. This planet looks gorgeous. Anyway, this shot of the planet being invaded. Queen Amidala is captured. And while this is happening, the Jedi come up out of the planet core into a lake in in Theed City. I get that there's time jumps in a movie, but that one stretches it a little too far for me. Anyway, just thought I'd mention it. It's at this point, I said I love the Neimoidian culture, but I also kind of don't like it. For this one aspect. Now, I get that seeing your protagonists kill actual people is not the most popular thing to do. And I think George Lucas kind of simplistically sidestepped this and having the main antagonists of the prequels basically be droids. And by main antagonists, I know Palpatine's the main antagonist, but I mean, in the one that they face most often, they are droids. And this is basically done for the simplistic reason of you don't want to feel bad that your protagonists are killing people. You want to root for your heroes. You want to feel just in their cause. Now, I can understand that. And again, with the Neimoidian culture, it kind of works for me. But I do have to admit that while George Lucas says that these are the Jedi in their prime, I'm never really convinced about that except for the last scene, or the last action sequence in the movie when they're facing off against Darth Maul. To me, you know, again, any humans, and they've shown this at the end battle, any human can take down a droid. Anybody with tactics can take down a droid. This isn't a innately superior military force. And the Jedi cutting them down like butter is frankly, especially in the scene when they rescue the Queen, it's always unimpressive for me. It's never excited me. Well, maybe, that's a lie. Maybe the first time I saw it, it excited me. But it doesn't excite me now because there's no stakes. They're droids. They can get cut apart like butter. And I've always wondered what it would be like to have the added underlying fact that the Jedi, these heroes of the Republic, when stuff goes wrong, basically kill their way to victory because they're just that good, and they're tornadoes of fury. And even though they're not Darksiders, they're still the most efficient people and probably the most efficient at killing at this time in the galaxy. And I don't know, that idea has always been interesting to me. But anyway, boring action sequence, boring Jar Jar doing really dumb stuff. And by the way, his CGI is terrible in this scene. If you see it, it's like, wow, dude. Anyways, so they go to escape, and they have a really dumb conversation that nobody really should be having, because Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, but mainly Qui-Gon, is being absolutely correct and smart to the Queen. You need to come with us, they will kill you. Now, in fairness, he's kind of actually wrong about that, because we know Palpatine, at least from what we see, wants her to sign the treaty. But he doesn't really know that. Her advisor says they wouldn't dare, they need her to make this invasion legal. Not taking into account that they already don't care whether things are legal. I mean, we know they do, but in their actions they haven't demonstrated that. Not to the Naboo people in the least. So it's always struck me as just kind of more filler and trying to have a dramatic scene without any like real weight to both sides. And it ends quickly too. It's kind of just like, you need to come with us. It's just like, no, she can't. And she's like, my place is with us. My place is with my people. And it's like, no, you should go. Palpatine needs your help. And it's weird that the guy who says you need to stay to make this invasion legal and help Senator Palpatine are the same guy. That's always been weird to me. But anyway, they go in, get to the shiny chromium ship. Another boring action sequence. Though I do admit it is kind of funny the way it starts, where just like, you're taking these people to Coruscant? Yes. You're under arrest. Like, that little exchange will make me grin. But other than that, it's just like, okay, another boring action sequence. Some people have said, that the Queen and crew get away from the blockade too easily. Now, I don't agree personally. It's a small ship, and the ships are set pretty wide apart. In fact, it's only like one station there attacking them, which I don't get why there's only one, where in the beginning I believe we see multiple. But anyway, so there's only one, and they escape, and R2-D2 is the only astromech sent to like save the ship when it gets almost blown up, because he has original trilogy syndrome and we know he's going to be there. So shrug. It's interesting seeing the conversation around the captain, Panaka, and Qui-Gon about going to Tatooine. because Qui-Gon notes is like, no, the Federation has no presence there, and he's like, well, how do you know that? And Qui-Gon says it's controlled by the Hutts, and the captain has a very visceral reaction to that, as I think he should. The Hutts are generally a disgusting culture, in my opinion. Fascinating, but disgusting. But there's an interesting thing there that I don't think is touched up on enough, because it's kind of noted that that the Trade Federation is basically in the same ilk as the Hutts, and it's never really, I think, properly gotten across except for this one, and it's never referenced except for this one sentence, how truly powerful the Federation are. Indeed, we kind of get another indicator of this, that they have their own seat in the Senate, and they're not even a planet. They're I don't know what the proper word for it is, but they're like basically a big money organization, uh, and that's it. And they have a seat in the Galactic Senate. That does say something about their place in the galaxy. And the only other way I think this is properly acknowledged by the characters is when uh, there's discussion that the Hutts are better than the Trade Federation, and there's this discussion because it's mentioned that the Trade Federation has uh, control over multiple worlds, and they're not blockading all of them, but that it's on a control equal to the Hutts, and it's just kind of like a pick your poison kind of thing. And in this case, going to a planet that's controlled by the Hutts and not by the Trade Federation is beneficial because the whole Trade Federation is after them. So, makes sense. Um, this would be another character establishing moment for Obi-Wan if he was the only one there. He's a younger man than this captain he has to fight against. That the guy who has more experience, but Obi-Wan has the better tactical and diplomatic mind for this thing, and it's kind of starting to show. Obi-Wan has to work at this a bit more now. He's really trying now because this is a mission that probably for him has been the most foobar it could be. So yeah, and then we have the scene. Uh, no, I'll save Darth Maul for later. Okay, so we get to Tatooine, and I'm gonna slip once more into my Obi-Wan fan fiction-y, or my interpretation of how this would be better with Obi-Wan, because we'd get there with Obi-Wan, and first of all, this would serve two purposes, because the ship would be alone without a Jedi, and it would be Obi-Wan who'd be the first to meet Anakin, who would be the only one of the two Jedi to meet Anakin, especially if the second wasn't there. And I say this is important because there's a real strong sense in Return of the Jedi, and I know I'm jumping ahead by a lot, but Obi-Wan's Force Ghost mentions to Luke how basically in a tone, this is, like, when I met your father, this and this and this, and he was an amazing pilot, and clearly, extremely talented and powerful and all this stuff. And here, when you think about it, Obi-Wan never really met Anakin as he was before. He meets Anakin when he's freed. Um, and there again, I'm not the biggest expert of the EU in the prequel era, but I never really got the sense in the few works I had read, and in two or three, that Obi-Wan really knew much about Anakin before they met on the ship, as things are happening, and it's like, Qui-Gon's attacked. So I'd have Obi-Wan go there, and Obi-Wan, wanders into the shop. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for Tatooine, but he's like, okay, same deal as before. The hyperdrive's down. We got to fix it. So he goes into the shop, and this is where the second part comes in. Anakin is a slave. Frankly, and I think this is kind of like, I don't know, a symptom of. Actually, I don't know what a symptom is. I'm going to speculate here. The slavery here is toned down. If I didn't know better, and if it wasn't called slavery, I'd just assume that Anakin and his mother are just really low class. Because they have their own home, they're treated fairly well, they are given reasonable clothing, they have hours, that are reasonable. Uh, the only really horrible part is mentioned that they have a implant somewhere on them that if they try to run away, that they will blow them up for running away. And it's dark out of nowhere, and honestly, if I'm being completely blunt, kind of, is is really like tonally, you know, not there with the rest of how the slavery in Tatooine is portrayed. Now, there are a couple of answers I could give for this. The out of universe reason is it's unpleasant to portray slavery, and frankly, I probably think George didn't want to. And again, George is a very simple idea man. Um, Anakin is enslaved, and he doesn't go into what that means or how he's enslaved or what is actually done to him. uh, I've seen fan fictions handle that better, and I'm not bashing fanfics. I'm a fanfic writer, um, but I just think it's interesting, to be honest, that the slavery really isn't slavery when you think about it. And maybe it's just my bias because it's real life, and real life slavery is and was horrible. And I'm just gonna say it like that. So I'm gonna exit out of the Obi-Wan thing for now. I'll tell you when I get to it more. Um, there is no denying that Jake Lloyd's acting, the actor who portrays Anakin as a kid, is not a great actor. In fact, I wouldn't even. Actually, I shouldn't say that because I can't properly judge it. Um, he does not deliver a good performance in this movie. At the best of times, it is just blankly over enthusiastic and over like shouty. I don't know what he was thinking as a kid, but it comes off as someone who uh, he didn't know how to convey certain emotions, so he just comes off as louder. And there's one scene where that's an exception. Um, there's actually two scenes I think he's really good at, but the rest, you can tell this is a symptom of the whole like people being terrified to be in a new Star Wars film. Added to the fact that he's a kid, he in several things his line delivery is bland, and it is painful. That being said, I'm going to go into something that I don't really want to talk about, but I feel is necessary because I haven't heard it talked about by others. Several people have argued that um, Star Wars, as a franchise or the fans, have ruined people's lives. Now, I generally don't agree with that, with two possible exceptions, and really only one in my mind. You could argue Carrie Fisher. Um, you could argue Hayden Christensen. I don't, personally, to either of those. But I will argue it strongly for Jake Lloyd. Jake Lloyd did not perform well in this movie. I'm going to be, honest about that. But he did not have any help, to be blunt as well. George Lucas has been noted by people in the original trilogy and in the prequel trilogy, after the fact, as not being the best character director. He does not give you a lot to work with. He will give you general things, but he won't help you out on the nuances, generally, from everything I've seen. So you have a kid who isn't the best naturally at acting. You have a director who isn't the best naturally at directing and, pulling out good performances of adult actors, much less children. And I'm going to be frank. The way Jake Lloyd was treated, this has gotten much better in recent years, but the way he was treated, it's disgusting. He, in interviews, had described the treatment he received for playing a character in a movie as being horrible, as the bullying that he received at school, this kid being not even in middle school when this film comes out, as being a living hell. And, I've been bullied, and, and I have issues about it to this day, and it wasn't even that extreme, to be blunt, in the overall spectrum of like what I know people have been through. And I'm still dealing without it today. And I was older. He was 9. Now, I admit I am not the most knowledgeable on psychology, but I have no doubt that the way he was treated has contributed to how his life has gone. There is no doubt about that, in my opinion. Now, he has been diagnosed, I believe, with schizophrenia. I do not know whether you can develop that over time due to negative experiences or if you are born with it. But there's no doubt in my mind that maybe ruined was a simplistic way to say it, but I have no doubt in my mind that the fandom, that his experience in Star Wars ultimately led to his life being much more negative to me than it would have otherwise. And as someone who, loves Star Wars and champions it as a force for good, it basically got me into fiction. It got me to like where I would want to talk about something for, oh geez, over 55 minutes because I love it. But, if I were given the choice to not have the prequels made because someone would have told me it would have saved his life, I'd seriously consider it. And people argue it's like, well, Hayden Christensen was treated bad, and Natalie Portman was treated bad, but they were adults. They can handle that. Now I know, I'm not saying adults don't have mental breakdowns and they can't have a hard time, but they've been in the biz a while. Uh, and I'll talk about Hayden Christensen and the fan reception to him more in 2 and 3, but he's dealt with it. He's pretty much come to peace with it. He was at Celebration for the 40th anniversary. He took pictures with guys holding jars of sand. He's kind of come to peace with it in his own way. Jake Lloyd was 9 or 10 or 8. He was young. I know Anakin's 9 in the film. This segues into something else I want to talk about. I've heard the opinion that Anakin would have worked better in this movie as a teenager. Now, I could see that working, but I also disagree. Mainly because I've heard George's comments on the situation. George wanted to portray a kid who was basically an angel. And I know that's kind of like derogatory, especially like, are you an angel? But I still say it because I think he's right. To think that the most terrifying villain in the galaxy, the man who we find out later has genocided hundreds of people at his point in A New Hope, who was basically the most feared man in the galaxy alongside Palpatine. That guy, that monster, was a little kid that was sweet and cared about people and was happy and wanted to explore the galaxy. Not to conquer it or to kill, but because he just wanted to see it all. And yes, I am referring to that scene where he says, Has anyone ever been to the stars? I want to see them all, because that's exactly what he should have been, and that was exactly, in my opinion, the one of two scenes that Jake Lloyd gets right, because it would have been fascinating if this was done right. And again, I'm not just putting this on Jake Lloyd, I'm putting this on George Lucas as well. That Anakin as a kid is a brilliant idea, because it's like exploring, like, what was Hitler like as a kid? Could you really kill a kid? If you now, maybe Hitler as a kid was a little asshole, I don't know. But the point remains, you know, how do you feel towards this kid? How, and it brings the greater intrigue, how does a kid this sweet, a person starting out as great as they are, turn into one of the most evil people that the galaxy has ever known? And I would have, yeah, people talk about the age gap between him and Amidala. Honestly, I don't see it. They're basically forming a friendship, a poorly written friendship in several ways. But again, I don't see the issue of him being a kid. It was the execution I have a problem with, except for the scene I mentioned and the scene I'm going to get to. But Anakin being a kid, I have no problem with that. So, going back to the Obi-Wan thing, he meets Anakin. He sees how horrible his life situation is, because I'd also make the slavery horrible if I was in charge of the remake, which I know, ego, I know it's never going to happen. But I'd have him basically, he's like, okay, I'm out of ideas. When he gets the thing, it's like, Republic credits won't work. I am screwed. He basically follows Anakin along, and he's just like, I need a place to stay, and I probably would keep the slave quarters if make them slightly less livable. Also get rid of the C-3PO thing. It shrinks the universe. Anyways, oh, that's what I wanted to talk about. Okay, two things. Well, three. Going into the regular movie now, out of the Obi-Wan stuff again. Um, it is clear that people don't know where they're looking when they're looking at Jar Jar, because he's taller than the actor. He's like about a foot, and some people are looking at the actor's head in the stupid suit they had for him. Some are looking above him, as they should. Some people are just generally like looking in the middle, because how could you not? you know Motion capture technology and like how to make it easier for the actors wasn't really a thing back then. um I just wanted to comment on that. The dinner scene between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Anakin. This again is a good scene, and I give more props to Jake Lloyd, but this is more about his mother, and again, it could be debated a negative that it's some person talking about their son, but it's a mother. They talk about their children all the time. It's a good character establishing moment for Anakin, when he's like, "Mother, you said the biggest problem in the universe is that nobody helps each other," and that's and that one line I will give credit to Jake Lloyd for, because he does sound very sincere, and he sounds sad. He wants to help these people, uh, not because of any benefit to him, or obviously he wants to be freed, and when he asks that of Qui-Gon, he really does want it, but in the end he just wants to help him. He doesn't know that Qui-Gon is going to end up bartering Watto for his freedom. He doesn't know any of that, but he still wants to help because it's the right thing, and not enough people help each other. And I like that. I don't have a lot to say about Watto. I've heard the Jewish stereotype. Honestly, yeah, it kind of does fit, and especially with the way that the Toydarians act over on the Clone Wars, which is nothing like Watto. It kind of does make me raise an eye. Maybe it's a regional accent. I don't know. Um, Next thing I want to talk about is Anakin's immaculate conception. Now, I know that's for anybody who's theologically inclined, they know that the Immaculate Conception refers to Mary being born without sin and that whole concept, but I'm not going to get into that. Anakin was the result of a virgin birth. They say that very simplistically. They don't literally say it, but when Qui-Gon asks, like, who is his father? Um, she says, there was no father. I can't explain it. I birthed him. I raised him. Now, on the surface of this, as weird as this may sound, I don't have a problem with this. Throwing the dumb midichlorians, which I'll get to when they're like mainly discussed on Coruscant in that scene, but ignoring that, the idea of the Force kind of acting as like the Holy Spirit or God. This is a good time to mention that I'm Catholic, by the way, which is why I'm saying this in really theological terms. But let's say the Force is let's say God in this case is the Force, and like you are born. Like I can get that, but mainly for the thematic reasons. Because it's interesting to think of what would happen if Jesus was successfully tempted by Satan in his fast in the desert. What happens when your savior becomes the person that damns everyone, becomes the person that gives into their own darkest desires and screws everyone over? The Bible would be a lot different. And if you believe in Christianity, then the world would be very different, frankly. But I don't want to get all into that. The point is, Anakin as a Christ-like figure, especially in relation to the prophecy, is interesting because we know he falls, and we ultimately know, in broad strokes what that does to the Jedi. And I hate to say this, but it's poorly executed, and that's why like the themes that I was hoping for aren't really there. They're only there in surface level. And again, I think George, being the simplistic idea man that he is, just said, wanted to give an allegory or an allusion to Jesus, especially with the prophecy coming along and Jesus being the fulfiller of a of a prophecy, basically, in the Bible. So yeah, there's nothing I really have to say about that except that I'm disappointed that that concept didn't go anywhere. Um, if he were to have a father, honestly, I'd have the father be a nobody. I'm serious. Like, I like the idea, and I'm kind of hoping this is what's going to happen with Rey over in the sequel trilogy, and I'll get more to that when we get more to that. But I'm hoping that she comes from people who are nobodies, because Jedi have come for thousands of years from people who are nobodies, because they don't generally breed or mate, however you want to say that. They just come out of nowhere. And the idea to me that his father was a, a spice miner, maybe that's where Owen got the lie. Um, That's another thing. Why isn't Owen in this movie? Because it always struck me in the original trilogy that they were actually brothers. So, whatever. Anyways, tangent. But if Anakin's father was just a guy that ended up being killed, you know, if you really wanted to have the dark implications with the slavery and stuff, you could say, change Watto to a human, and that gets horrible pretty quickly. Uh, so I'd be fine with him having had a father. Either way, it's kind of a non-issue for me at this point. Then the pod race happens. Now, it's worthy to note that George Lucas at least has the sense of pacing that he cut about 80, like 60 to 80% of this sequence. By his own admission, this sequence would have extended the movie by a little over half an hour, I believe, was his estimation, and that is insane. Um, some people note the pod race as like a reason to watch the Phantom Menace. I don't actually agree with that. Um, I know why it needs to happen. It moves the plot along so that they can get off Tatooine, but I don't like it. And then there's the first battle with the Sith. Now this would be interesting if this was Obi-Wan instead of Anakin, because I'd very much want this battle to be one that he's losing, that he's been struggling all this time, and he figures, he senses that Anakin is powerful, um, and he's you know he's like, what do I got to do with this guy? I'm sensing that he's more powerful than anything. I got to free him, and he doesn't know how to do that, so he clumsily rigs the dice thing, with a much less confidence than Qui-Gon does, and he's fleeing the planet. He's just like, okay, we got to go. This kid is more powerful than I've ever seen, and on top of that, the mission is, foo bar beyond all belief, tautology, but whatever. And then a Sith happens. This is pretty much the cap to the worst mission that Obi-Wan has had in his life, and he doesn't know what to do. He's never fought, unless we take the EU into account. He's never fought a person using the dark side, especially one this skilled. And I'd want him to be basically like just barely, you know, holding the Sith off. He tells Anakin to run, and instead of telling Obi-Wan, hey, Qui-Gon's in danger, he tells, the captain or something. It's like, hey, Obi-Wan's in danger. And eventually, uh, so Obi-Wan's basically just like being pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. He's on the defensive, which, if I may remind you, is one of the reasons, his perfect defense, why Obi-Wan was considered by many, by the Clone Wars era, to be the quintessential Jedi, was his ultimate defense. So kind of showcase, a little bit how, it's getting to that level. And then it gets saved because the ship is like firing on him and on a mall. It gives him enough time to run away. That's how I would have done it. Give me your thoughts. Checking my notes. Okay. So as weird as this sounds, I don't have much to say about Coruscant that hasn't already been said. I mean, that has already been said might not be the surprising part. Coruscant is a very interesting concept, a whole planet that's a city, and how, that works and is insane. In the EU, they go into how a planet like this operates, and the logistics of it are insane and barely possible, but it is possible. And I got to give credit for the writers who came up with that. And I'm not going to go into the full details on how a planet like that works. Um, you know, Supplying water is pretty big part of that. You know, um, Having oxygen when there's barely any trees, that's another part of it that you have to explain. But it is, and I'm not gonna recite that because, frankly, again, I don't know much of the EU in the prequel era. Not a lot of it, anyway. Um, so we get to Coruscant. Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Wow. I'm gonna backtrack. The second scene that I mentioned Jake Lloyd is good in. Third, I guess, if you want to count that one line he had in the dinner scene. The second scene is when he's alone with Padme. There's no hint of a romantic connection, at least not to me. This comes across as a boy who's sad that he has to leave his mother. Um, I don't count. Should I? No, I don't count the scene where he's leaving his mother as a good one. he's a little flat in that. But this one's very good. He clearly misses his mother. There's an implication that he's been crying. It's so cold in space. That's a good line from a kid who's grown up on a desert planet. And this kind of human to human moment with Padme, who he's gotten along with, and just the very human moment of the formerly slave child and the queen in hiding. That concept has always made me smile inside. It's a very good dynamic, and the fact that he doesn't really know what he's doing anymore. He's going off to places he's never been to be a Jedi, and the fact that she really doesn't know where she's going either, because she was a queen basically, and I'm not going to get into the whole weirdness of electing a queen, but okay. Um, she doesn't really know what she's doing either. She thought, well, this is going to be a plain simple thing. The Jedi are going to negotiate, and you guys are going to screw off. The Trade Federation is going to go away, and she's learning very quickly that the politics of that are not are much deeper and much more complicated than she previously thought. And seeing how Padme is the determined sort, it makes no surprise to me that in the second film she's become a senator and has become much more adept because she wasn't the first time, and that let her people down. And that's a good touch. Anyways, so that scene they have is very human, and the Japor snippet, I will admit, it's a nice emotional connection and is, pretty much cements the thing in Revenge of the Sith when you see her body like this and she has the snippet on her neck. That that basically seals the emotional deal for me. I do cry easily, though not often. That may sound contradictory, but it isn't. So we get to Coruscant, and more politician-y stuff happens. More bureaucratic stuff of like, is there any proof that your planet has been invaded? They probably should have had some, but moving on. But basically, how the whole system works, how the whole system rather doesn't work, because the Republic's been basically resting on their laurels because there's been no need to improve as a society. Not really. I mean, Coruscant is the epitome of opulence. There's peace everywhere. Everything's nice. We have the Jedi to help out. There's this sense that there's no real need for reform anymore. And while that is a simplistic idea, and is probably not true in actuality, it is nice to me that the senators and the people that are only self-interested are very much willing to ignore everything else in terms for their own personal gain. That being said, it is nice how a lot of people, how almost universally the Chancellor, Balorum, is slapped down and universally is decried, and everyone wants him out. Now, in the EU, I do know that a lot of that is because of Palpatine's manipulations and the fact that Valorum in actuality wasn't actually that good of a leader. So that makes sense, right? Now going to the Jedi. It is clear that the Jedi are a big part of Anakin's fall. And I will get to that more in episode 2 and 3. But their arrogance, especially in the scene, is like, the Sith? No, that can't be right. Granted, they do trust Qui-Gon pretty quickly, but their idea that, no, the Sith are gone, that's a ridiculous concept to them. And it would have been a fun idea for Obi-Wan to have a harder time convincing them. I was like, no, this isn't just a dark Jedi. Like, I was in serious, fear for my life. Or in serious danger, maybe? I don't know how he'd phrase it, but just, Obi-Wan saying, like, no, you guys don't get it. Another thing about the Jedi that's always confused me, especially in this episode, is why is Mace in charge? Like, I get he's played by Samuel L. Jackson, but really, I mean, you have Yoda there who's been alive for, prior to this, like, about 9 centuries. You know, why isn't he the leader? And why hasn't he been for, like, a couple hundred years, at least? You know, it just makes this, granted, probably, or not probably, one of the best swordsmen around, lightsaber swordsmen around, in this era and into the Clone Wars era, but he's not Yoda. Anyway, that's always confused me. Speaking of which, uh, the CGI Yoda in the 2011 Blu-ray release is so much better. I'm just going to be blunt about that. Uh, in every way. Fun fact, George Lucas originally wanted to start off the CGI Yoda thing in this episode, but he was never satisfied with what what the CGI team came up with as the finished product. So, if you're wondering why the reason is that the puppet kind of looks really different, and like kind of like it was just like, well, okay, we need something to work with, so here. That's why. uh I never really liked the puppet. I always, wow, does it not look like Yoda? So CGI is better. I watched the 2011 Blu-rays for all the movies, just for reference. Um, but yeah, CGI Yoda, so much better. Now, how do I say this? It's interesting to me, the Jedi's method of testing, because it makes no sense. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It only makes sense on a basic level, because they acknowledge later in the meeting with like Qui-Gon, with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, that he's extremely powerful and that his future is very clouded. But what you see of the test uh, is a memory test, and I get that if you're really strong in the Force, you'd be able to get all of them, but I don't know. But it is a good scene, that test scene, and that it really explores Anakin's character. Um, because uh, uh, Master Mundi, he comes, your thoughts dwell on your mother, and he says, well, yeah, and he's like, and Yoda mentions that he's afraid to lose her. Now, this Anakin's issue with attachment is something I'll talk about more in episode 2, but suffice it to say that the Jedi method of getting rid of that, if you want to call it a problem, basically should not work. And let's be honest, doesn't work if you come to them too old, because it does make sense why they recruit very young, because the way they do things is rather unorthodox and, to be blunt, rather contrary to how humans act in general. I mean, let's be honest, not many of us are, of that Buddhist, Zen kind of like, nothing impacts me, I experience emotions and let them go. Not many people can do that. And let's just say, the fact that Anakin is older and doesn't know how to do that and is of the caring sort that he doesn't want to do that, and that the Jedi can't really adapt to that, that the seeds of that shown here, um, that those are one of the few nice things that I like about Phantom Menace, that calls forward to why Anakin falls. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Trying to think of anything else. Yoda's line. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. It is a good line. And I've always kind of appreciated it for the simplistic way that indeed Yoda has basically been treating the Jedi as an organization, as a concept, as the same as the rest of the universe progresses. So in universe, I like it that way, but out of universe, I can't help but notice that you could switch around any of those things and come up with the same thing. It's not like a linear like fear always leads to anger, anger always leads to hate, is or fear always leads to, you get what I mean, right? I mean, this isn't. And the funny thing is, Yoda of all people should know this, but whatever. So then the Queen decides to go back to Naboo. Now, I will admit that this is a good scene, and one of the few scenes where Jar Jar does not annoy me, which, for that. Uh, and it does make sense that Gungans, to me at least, would have an army, because they are very isolationist people, and especially from Boss Nass's comments, are probably paranoid that the Naboo really don't want them there. So, army, I get it. Um, that plus Amidala's determinants to get her people back, to get her people free. While while Senator Palpatine may become Chancellor, it would still be too late. I often wonder if uh, Palpatine expected this or wanted this. Because it's clear, to me at least, that he could have won the race and, probably, with a lot of finagling, gotten some of his emergency powers early and basically said, to the Jedi en masse, maybe with a small fleet, get rid of this problem. And he probably would have done that too, to cement him as the awesome leader that everybody considered him to be by 2 and not as much by 3. Um, but I have no doubt that he never would have truly tried to stop her. And he doesn't. So, my theory is kind of confirmed with that. Um, because that's one more thing he doesn't have to do. Because I would note that him trying to finagle and get his emergency powers early and just get rid of the situation, while it would be popular to many who were tired of things just being endlessly debated, would also receive criticism. So this way, he's out of the loop completely. Um, Good for him, right? So he goes back, and going to the Obi-Wan thing, here's where I would have a second Jedi, probably Qui-Gon, enter into the film. Now, I say this is where I'd have a second Jedi, like a master, like Qui-Gon Jinn, enter the film, is because it would make no sense for there not to be. Remember, they didn't send Obi-Wan on a mission to help liberate a planet. They sent him, as a final like trial test to help with negotiations, and they basically assumed, well, the negotiations are going to go through positively on their end. So, to me, it makes sense that they would send along with him a master, someone who, hasn't, while they probably haven't dealt with a situation on this scale in a long time, would nevertheless be more experienced and more able to deal with the kind of challenges that a mission like this would present. So, send along his old master, or I guess his current master, Qui-Gon, and we'd meet him on Coruscant, and you could have him basically be the same character of, he's not on the council, and when Obi-Wan and he talk, he's like, wow, I sense this child is, extremely powerful, and you did the right thing. I'm surprised you never would, go against your strict mission mandate. And then there'd be some good dialogue where it's like, well, this mission didn't go out exactly as planned, and it would be some good stuff, some good character interaction to help flesh out more Obi-Wan and flesh out the man who trained him. So have them both go to Naboo, I think. Yeah. Um, and then from this point on, the film enters to me the least flawed it gets, because on Coruscant there is still a lot of bureaucracy and scenes where it's like, well, you know, the courts take even longer than the Senate to decide things, and Samuel L. Jackson looks the most bored he's ever been in a film, like ever. um, but this is the point where this stops being, where the film largely gets to its best for me, because they go to Naboo, they go straight to the Gungans. There's a great scene where, I guess if you weren't paying attention, that Padme's actually the queen, and the Jedi are like looking, I knew it all along. And the whole preparation for the battle and the whole tactical part of it actually makes sense. Which, which is great, because, if you have a threat, you have a sizable threat, send you send the droids to the outer place to deal with it. And the arrogance of the Nemoidians, I have no problem believing that it's just like, well, we'll leave a skeleton force here. Meanwhile, the actual mission is at the palace, and the Gungans are just a diversion, which I find it interesting that even though an alliance has just been established between the Gungans and the Queen, that they're all the more willing to sacrifice, and perhaps that is because they have been driven from their homes too, and that this would just happen to benefit them as well. I don't know. What I do know is that making Jar Jar a general is stupid. No, really, there's a trope for this. It's basically like being a good person gets you promoted, which is not how it works. You know, I've never been, close to being in the military, but even I know that's not how it works. And Jar Jar is a civilian. He's not even like an infantryman or a um or anything. He's just promoted to a general. That's a high rank. Like, wow. And I would like to note that this would be better in my version, where, Jar Jar's a kind of Han Solo type, someone who's had to make it on their own, someone who's probably combat capable to some extent. And, while it would still be, really dumb to promote someone to that, at least, my version of Jar Jar would be competent in that position, rather than Jar Jar, who's, killing of droids, his accidental uh, victories are played for laughs. Call me crazy. So the battle occurs. As I said, great tactics. And then Darth Maul shows up. Now, I will admit, along with that, basically everyone, that Duel of the Fates and this battle are my favorite part of the Phantom Menace. There's no denying that. From a pure, surface level emotion, like, yeah, this is my favorite part. Unsurprising. Awesome lightsaber fight. This is the part where I believe that um, the Jedi are in their prime, because cutting through droids like butter doesn't really say that to me. Again, call me crazy. But it is here that I would like to talk about Darth Maul. You see, I don't know the people who know this who aren't born, who weren't born back then, I should say, or, it's 2017 when you're watching this, so you may not be born yet, but Darth Maul was never really an interesting character to me. Not until, I mean, he was obviously very cool to look at, but it is worthy to note that we don't really get the awesome Darth Maul, in my opinion, that we know today, until we get to his appearances in the Clone Wars, and to his beautiful ending of an arc in Rebels. Uh, Amazing. until then, Darth Maul was just a cool-looking guy, a badass who could flip, who had a new type of lightsaber we'd never seen before, which I'm not saying is an invalid reason to like him. I'm just saying that to me, there was no emotional connection to me, and we and and we only get an emotional connection with Darth Maul because he survives, because he comes back and haunts Obi-Wan. There's that emotional connection because he's the one that killed his master. Hell, he's the one that kills the only person he's ever admitted to being in love with. At least in canon, that's true. Um, and I bring that up because I would have preferred a villain as cool as Darth Maul is, and as cool as and as amazing a character as Darth Maul becomes. I would have preferred the antagonist to have a personal connection with our protagonist, like Darth Vader. We find out Darth Vader does in the original trilogy, and like we find out that Kylo Ren is in The Force Awakens, and hell, even Krennic has a personal connection to Jin, if you think about it. Now you may ask, well, Analyze Nation, how would you do that? Well, I have a couple ideas. One, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, hmm, and would work, and I would admit would not, how do I say this? It would be difficult to pull off. Let's say, let's say, rewinding back to when the Jedi send uh, Qui-Gon with Obi-Wan, in my version. Let's have another Jedi come along that's a friend to Obi-Wan, that says, I want to go. Like, you're my friend, and this Jedi's a bit older. He's experienced. He's not quite at he's a knight. Definitely nowhere experienced as any master or council master, but they allow it because, hell, this is the biggest battle they've seen, and they're going to need all the help they can get. So, the battle happens, and, there's great character moments with them, and, it's nice to be together, this is great. And then there's a point where they're getting a little too close to the Viceroy, where that Jedi friend of Obi-Wan's and maybe of Qui-Gon's flips. And from there, it's revealed that he's the Sith. He had a hood on, or you could put a mask on him, on the character when he fights Obi-Wan at Tatooine. And this is a shock and a hurtful betrayal for Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon kind of like, it's obvious that it hits him too, but he takes it in stride the best he can. Obi-Wan is devastated. He does not fight well in the upcoming battle. He gets knocked around a bit more like he does with Darth Maul. He just cannot believe this. This is his friend. You could even imply it's his best friend, and out of nowhere, he's fallen to the dark side. And he doesn't know how to deal with that. And the same separation thing happens, which admittedly, if you're looking at the beams and why they're there, it's only for plot reasons. Whatever. But it would be so much more interesting to me to have that kind of connection with Obi-Wan that admittedly we wouldn't get throughout the film, but I think would very much highlight Obi-Wan's character, and especially concerning how he would move forward in treating Anakin, and probably eventually, although in a different way, Luke. Because there's, again, in episode 6, jumping forward a lot, Obi-Wan mentions that he thought that despite what he sensed in Anakin, that he thought he could train him and that he thought he could help him and that he was wrong. Wouldn't it be all the more beautiful and more tragic if the reason he tried so hard, if the reason maybe he pushed Anakin more than he should have, didn't listen as much, was because his friend, the person he was closest to, that he didn't even see coming, that they had turned to the dark side, he couldn't help. And that this person got his master killed, almost got him killed. Basically have it be so that he's, shocked and scarred right from the beginning that a friend of his, someone close to him, turned to the dark side out of nowhere. And think of how more tragic it would make that it happens to him a second time with Anakin, who is basically a blood brother with him at that point. Wow. Man, that's hitting me. I don't mean to be arrogant in saying that my own idea is hitting me, but you have to admit, I think, that the added emotional connection with Obi-Wan right from the beginning would add a lot to the prequel story as a whole and to Obi-Wan's character as a whole, rather than the delayed emotional connection that we get with Darth Maul. My opinion, as always. So Qui-Gon dies. There's the big no, which is repeated in both the other trilogies. And then in this scene, and let's be honest, we see this in, the actual movie and in my version. This is where Obi-Wan, unleashes it, albeit he's very emotionally affected by the situation. In fact, probably would be even more in my version. So he slips up, but he's very much, he's countering everything, but then he gets a little too greedy. He presses in on Darth Maul, and Darth Maul is basically nope, and forces him down the down the chasm, I guess, or the hole, whatever you want to call it. And then something dumb happens. And this has been commented on by other people, mainly the lore runner. There is a ridiculous amount of time between the moment where Darth Maul realizes that Obi-Wan's focusing on something, namely Qui-Gon's lightsaber, and the point at which he leaps up and cuts him in half. Now, in the universe, I'd say this is arrogance at its possibly most lethal level. But really? And I get the out-of-universe reason, the music swells, there's the, emotional pan to Qui-Gon's body and the, saber is, just twitching on the ground. And it's ridiculous to me. I mean, again, I'm a geek. Am I actually upset about this? Am I going to protest, write a petition? No, I'm not going to do that. But it's just an interesting note. I'm trying to think of what to say about Anakin's battle up in space and about Padme's battle in the fortress. Unfortunately, I don't really have much to say on either of them. The space battle in Phantom Menace is frankly the dullest in any of the movies. People say Force Awakens has that title, but I don't see how, because the only real purpose the space sequence has in this film is to be a character establishing moment that Anakin can fly well, and frankly we've already had that in the pod race thing. They mention he's the only human who's done it. That's not insignificant. There's a lot of humans in the Star Wars galaxy. A lot of white ones at this point, but that's changing. So yeah, I don't really. I'll tell you the one explicit thing I remember, or two explicit things, and they're both dumb. One is, I'll try spinning. That's a good trick. And now this is pod racing. I mean, I get for plot reasons why it has to happen. The control ship has to blow up so that the thing shut down. Um, okay, you know, it takes a better mind than me to figure out how that's interesting. um, and then Padme's fight um, is an interesting fight, but again, I don't know. Maybe it's yeah, I literally don't know. It's never stricken me, even as a kid. It was never really an interesting sequence for me. Maybe again, it's the symptom of like you have your protagonist fighting droids, and to me, that doesn't make it interesting. Um, but yeah, they capture the Viceroy. Everything goes down. You know, Qui-Gon's like, "Promise me you will train Anakin," and Obi-Wan agrees. I'm wondering how this would play out in my version, though, because Qui-Gon wouldn't have as much as an investment in Anakin's training. He probably would, because, you know, if he's the same character as he is in the main film, he'd probably be pretty passionate about it. It's like, you know, this is a child from the prophecy you're saying? No, he must be trained. I feel like he'd have a more fatherly and genial uh, sending off words to Obi-Wan. Like, you know, don't blame yourself. It caught me off guard, or like, I know you'll be great at this, or something like that. You know, I'm not good at writing death scenes either, but something along those lines, something much more human, um, and personal than, you know, promise me you will train the boy. So then the funeral scene happens on, well, no, first the whole, you know, Gunray being marched out of the palaces, and then Palpatine says, "We will watch your career with great interest," which, you could say is a bit, obvious considering what we know now, but it's a scene that makes me grin, if horribly. And then the funeral scene happens. I'm trying to think whether the scene with Yoda and Obi-Wan um happened. It doesn't matter. I'll talk about them all. First, I'll talk about the Yoda and Obi-Wan scene first. First of all, it's a lot better with the CGI. I'm not going to go into that again. Just it's still true. But it's worthy to note that the Council agrees to train Anakin, but Yoda doesn't, and they overrule Yoda on this. To me, that is a curious decision on their part, because they've already decided, like, no, no, he will not be trained. Um, I just realized I forgot to talk about the midichlorian scene. Whatever, they're dumb. I mean, just think about a blood transfusion, then you realize it doesn't work. Anyway, um, so, Yoda's like, they've agreed for you to take Anakin as your apprentice. I do not. And I think this is because the Council, as obstinate as they are in the EU, in the Clone Wars, in the movies, I think they're this smart to know that with someone as powerful as Anakin, that it is a gamble to train him. But if the Sith are truly coming back, that they will need someone like him on their side. It is both awful to think that he did make the situation much better for them and eventually much worse for them. Guess the game will kind of work out in both ways. And then the funeral scene happens. I kind of think it's funny that it happens on Naboo and just the whole council like shows up. As I guess it's a big deal. Maybe masters don't die often. I don't know. Um, and a good scene happens um, between Yoda and Mace, where they're discussing um, that there's one that there's that there's always two, a master and apprentice, and but who has destroyed the master or the apprentice? And then there's a kind of not so subtle shot to Palpatine, and I may be a little embarrassed to admit this, but I did not get the twist that Palpatine was the Sith until episode 3 when it was actually revealed. That probably shows how young I was. But anyways, so that scene happens. There's great music again. John Williams is a god among men. And then the end celebration happens. Now, I've heard some people argue that this scene doesn't make sense, that they shouldn't be celebrating, and personally I disagree. They have lost their planet and gotten it back in about a week and a half. I mean, there really isn't a good sense of time here. We know it was conquered in a day, in less than a day, but we don't really know, how long it was until it was taken back. But the point is, in an extremely amount of time, they have achieved the ultimate victory. They have pushed them out. The Trade Federation will answer further crimes. Now, we know that's not exactly true, but that's what they think will happen. The Gungans and the humans are finally united together. It makes all the reason to me why they should celebrate. Now, Qui-Gon did die, but they do have the funeral. They're not ignoring that. And in a way, I think it is rather appropriate because they're celebrating having, and they're not realizing the dark days to come. Because The Phantom Menace really is an appropriate title for this film. The Phantom Menace is Palpatine. And it's not Darth Maul, because they find out who Darth Maul is and they kill him. Or Obi-Wan kills him. But, the people who aren't Jedi, that aren't Yoda and Mace, who don't realize there's something else. To everyone else, the conflict is over. There's nothing else to worry about. We have the planet back. The two species of the planet are in harmony for the first time in, I don't know how long, but a long time. But they don't know Palpatine is still out there. They don't even know of him as a concept yet. I enjoyed this film more than I thought I would, but I do admit that the logical hiccups and just the whole first two acts are hard for me to swallow, with the exception of a few scenes. And as I keep saying, I do so wish and despair for the Phantom Menace that we don't have. That would have been a great character building movie for Obi-Wan, because he needed it. And while I do acknowledge that Obi-Wan is probably considered the most popular character out of the prequels, that's because of episodes 2 and 3. And in my opinion, Ewan McGregor is absolutely amazing for salvaging a character that basically wasn't a character, not in any true depth, until 2 and 3. So, yeah, that's all I have to talk about. Jeez, it's nearly 2 hours. I had a lot more to talk about than I thought I would. Next Friday, I believe, should be my Attack of the Clones review or discussion. So, until then, this is Analyze Nation.